What's up, everyone? This is Matthew, aka Nifty Time. I'm back actually re-recording the podcast that I had originally recorded with Alimo. Technical difficulties popped up first time in 4.5 years. Kind of wild, but all for the best because we're going to get back into an amazing conversation and we're going to be able to give you even more details on the upcoming release that Alimo has planned on Nifty Gateway this Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern, for his new collection titled Summertime. But before we get into all of that, I want to welcome you to the show.
How's it going, everybody? Yeah, thanks so much. Had a really fun conversation for part one, and can't wait for part two.
Part one that only I was able to re-listen to, so that's fun. But yeah, let's get back into it, dude. First of all, let's get into your introduction. Tell us a little bit about who Alimo is today, and maybe before we get to who you are today, go back into the past and tell us about the creative journey that you've taken up until this point.
Sounds good. Yeah, so my name is Alimo. That's my artist name. My real name is Sean, but for art's sake, everybody calls me Alimo. I've been an artist, really since I was a little rugrat. I think every kid was painting and, using crayons to draw on the wall and kind of explore that imagination. And I kind of just never grew out of it. I was doing sports growing up, soccer and running, and that kind of evolved into snowboarding and surfing for my main lifestyle. But all through elementary school, junior high, and high school was very creative and very art focused. So whether that was painting or carrying around my camera and camcorder to kind of video all of me and my friends skateboarding. And then once it hit end of high school, everybody was asking what you're going to do for college. And during that time, I was in class doing ceramics and again, photography and videography. And I really didn't know what that entailed. And so my school they kind of supported everybody going towards business school. And so it kind of derailed me a little when I moved into college and my degree was business for some odd reason. And so it took me on this really interesting journey on figuring out my art because, my parents weren't forcing anything on me, but they were always really supportive on my art career. And then all of a sudden I take this weird derail on business, and it was really this interesting curveball where I had to find the solution on my own and my own path. And so a couple quarters into college, I wasn't doing very good, and a lot of my friends were like, "Hey, whatever happened to you drawing all the time and this whole art career?" And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And they're like, did you know that they have an art major here?" And I was like, what? And so it kind of turned into this path kind of reforming itself and going back to my roots. So long story is, I've been doing art since I was a kid, and it's just been anything creative has been super fun for me.
Love that. So one of the things I love double click into is when you were younger and you first got bit by the creating bug. Bring me back then. Like, what were you drawing? What were you creating? Anything that sticks out from those early days of creating? Always curious to hear more about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like so many memories pop back into my head when you ask that question. But I think maybe the most pivotal was in seventh grade, and I was in, the art class, and the teacher was teaching everybody how to paint a color wheel. And so we were painting the color wheel with different swatches. And then throughout that class, she introduced kind of like we were just playing around with pastels and chalk and just very basic items. And we were drawing with white chalk. And I came home and I was like, "Mom, Dad, like, I need chalk and I need paper now." And like I was super ecstatic on just brain dumping all these ideas that were in my head. And I still to this day, I busted out about 6 of these really strange, like African mask paintings where it's just like a head and really bright colors. And I used chalk to just draw basically 6 characters, no body, just a head. And they're still framed in my parents' house. And every time I go home, it kind of flashes me back to that one day. And I think, after I busted those out, like my art teachers, my parents were like, oh, where did this, like, where did these images come from your brain? And like, how do we help you pursue this even more? And so that was super pivotal for me. And I don't really draw with chalk ever. It was like one evening, and that kind of set me on this trajectory.
I love how those moments happen. And it's really cool that you still have that framed at your parents' house that you can go back and re-experience, relive that early creative moment. And then going back to university, I guess when you accidentally like started majoring in business, which is hilarious. And they kept doing the art and you're like creating on the side and until you realized that they also had like an art major. From then, like afterwards, like what happened with your career? Tell me more.
Yeah, so once I changed programs, I was really kind of interested in architecture and the art program. And at first, I was thinking I was going to go into architecture, and I talked to a counselor, and they basically said that I'd have to start all over again. And that was a 5-year program. And so I kind of said no to that. And then it switched over to the degree, which was called digital arts. And at the time, they didn't really know what that meant. And so it ended up being a heavy concept school and kind of learning all sorts of mediums. And so I was taking basically every art class that they had available, whether that was on the computer and kind of learning code, painting, really anything. But at the end of the day, you had to really explain what your concept was and what that narrative was. And so that ultimately was what the school taught me, was a story and how to present that. Once I graduated, I didn't really get to travel abroad a whole lot. Growing up, I traveled a lot in the States, but all these different countries really, like, I've always wanted to go explore. And so when I graduated, I was actually working in construction for the summer, and I was saving as much money as possible. And about 4 months in, I had about $3,000 in my pocket, and I bought a one-way ticket out to Australia. It kind of spooked my parents a little bit because at the time I said that I'm not going to bring my laptop or my phone. And so it really felt like this old school moment of like a cyber cafe and kind of writing in a blog and really like updating everybody through this mystery of where I was. And so what happened is I ended up hitchhiking all the way up Australia. And then I went out to Indonesia and Southeast Asia, and I was kind of surfing my way all the way up. And I got to Thailand and I had $50 in my name. And I didn't want to call home to get any sort of ticket home, any like free ticket back. And I was talking to a couple of my friends from uni, and they were teaching English in Vietnam. And I ended up buying a one-way ticket to Saigon for $49. And so I landed in Vietnam with $1. Next thing I know, I'm at my friend's house, and they're saying, hey, you can teach English, you can get $20 an hour. Again, this has nothing to do with art quite yet. And so I fake a diploma, like a TEFL, and this whole entire thing. And 2 days later, I became a 1st and 4th grade teacher, which I was incredibly unqualified for whatsoever. But it was super fun. I taught kids for a couple months, basically playing games and just having fun. And the next door neighbors where I was staying, they were 4 different creatives in Saigon. And, at the time there's 10 million people. There was probably about 200 Westerners living in Saigon. And 4 of these people were creatives at 4 different agencies. And so I ended up chatting with them. I actually moved in next door because they had an extra room. And, they knew that I was always drawing, and I went to school for this, and I'm trying to figure out, what my first job is going to be. They ultimately linked me in with those 4 agencies. And before I knew it, I was freelancing for these different companies out there, and which was super fun because it was, I was drawing Vietnamese typography. I was drawing manga characters on these little milk cartons and like all these really wild projects that who in the world would ever know that I would do that. And so I ended up staying out there for about a year, and that was like the stamp of where my career started. Yeah, and then after that, I moved back a year later, and I was home for a little bit, and then my brother and his wife were living in San Diego, and so I moved down there. I ended up staying there for a couple of years, kind of freelancing in different surf industry jobs, and that was a blast. And then fast forward, I moved up to San Francisco for about 6 years, and that's really where Alimo took off and the origin of it. And all these other companies I was working for before were different styles and kind of catering to their needs. And once I was in SF, it was kind of this moment to really explore who I am and what Alimo could be.
So actually, what is that genesis story for Alimo? Like, what does the name actually mean or signify? And like, why did the artist persona finally solidify while you were in SF?
That's a good question. So there's kind of a part one and a part two. The part one was at the end of college. My second to last classroom, it was this painting class, and I ended up working on this painting for, about a month. And with art school, you kind of go in and you present your work, and you kind of have a really nice concept and storytelling, because you end up talking for an hour. A canvas, big circle with a Sharpie, and that was project. I remember seeing him going, "Oh man, I'm going to tear this person apart with questions." It's so competitive. All you want to do is like break the person, which it's really sad, but that's kind of what art school is in a lot of ways. And so I went in and I presented my piece. It was okay, nothing crazy. And then this dude comes in and tells this elaborate story and basically drops the mic, and nobody had questions for him. It was brilliant. And I was so fired up. I like left the classroom and I was like, what am I doing? Why am I going to this college? Like, this is so dumb. I had one class left, and I was like, I just want to drop out right now. What's the point? And I ended up sticking around to the last classroom, and my last professor comes in and he's like, all right, guys, I know the last go for college before you graduate. We're going to have a lot of fun here. So each person is going to create their own skateboard brand. And at the end of the semester, we're going to have this huge show with merch and paintings and murals and this whole entire thing. And we're going to invite the whole school to come. So your project is to create this brand. So you got to come up with the name, the logo, like the whole works. And that got me all super fired up. And I ended up like scouring the internet and writing all these names down for the next 3 weeks. And towards the end of it, I was on this website called Urban Dictionary. And so I'm on Urban Dictionary. I'm still kind of fired up from the last semester. And I was like, I got to find a name that's like anti-concept, anarchy. And I typed on the search engine, and that's an Alimo popped up, which is really crazy because now it means so much. But at the time I read it and I was like, yeah, that's cool. And it like really resonated. And I was like, boom, that's like 100% my artist name forever. And that's really where my signature and Alimo came from. Fast forward, all those travels that I talked about, being in San Diego, going to SF, I really wasn't pushing what Alimo was in that college class, and that style really wasn't developed. The name was there, but the style that you see today was not around. And I left a freelance job that I had in SF, and two of my other friends, they also left, and we were like talking, we're like, what should we do? Should we start something? And we ended up finding this really neat studio in the Mission, and we all kicked down and got this thing. And none of us knew what we were making. We were just there to create. And so got in there and ended up just drawing every single day, trying to figure out what Alimo is. And during that moment, I got hired by this tech company. They were called Abstract at the time. I don't think they're around anymore, but I got hired to do their whole kind of brand illustration and this whole kind of system for them. And so for weeks, I was developing the style, like all these different styles, right, to present, and nothing was really resonating. The last night, I they're like, all right, we need the final tomorrow. This is it. Like we all have to pick a direction tomorrow. And so I'm at the studio like 7 p.m. and it's getting dark. Nobody's in there in this big warehouse. And my buddy Kyle, he like sees that I'm all flustered. We're listening to Spotify, but the analogy is that he kind of like slid over this CD and he's like, bro, just listen to this. This might help. Like music is so monumental. And I put this album on. It was a band called Cut Copy. How Spotify works is it just trickles down to 20 other albums. And I was in the studio like, 1 a.m., just like one spotlight on me, one person in this big area. And all of a sudden I had this crazy aha moment. And that is ultimately where the line work that we see today is. And so I pitched it to them the next day and they were like, we love it. And they used it. And then I ended up sticking with the style, really, really pushing on it for the next year. And it has evolved into this crazy thing we see today. That's a very long part one and part two, but that's ultimately where everything started.
You've talked about surfing multiple times already. Or if anyone's familiar with Alimo's art, surfing and water in particular is like a recurring theme. Tell me more about surfing, like how you got into that, how that relationship has translated itself into your art.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, everything that I've done growing up has been outdoors. It's always been camping, exploring, being at the mountain, snowboarding as a young rugrat. And when I got to high school, I discovered surfing, and that's kind of where this love for the ocean really came from. And I mean, before that, growing up, we'd be at the beach and you'd be digging sand castles and really having fun in the cold water, but I really didn't know what surfing was. Once I got hit on that bug, which is it was really similar to snowboarding. You're on a board, and that just translated over and was really seamless. And ever since, all my trips that I go to all around the world, everything is still pretty much focused around those two sports. And luckily, those two sports have taken me all over the world just to pursue awesome locations. So it's been really fun. Really, it's reoccurring because it's a lifestyle for me. It's something that I love, and it's something that I'll likely die doing because luckily surfing is, you see old timers out there at 70, 80 years old still paddling. So it's a great workout. Everything about it is just a really good reset for me. And especially since we're living on the computer all the time or I'm painting in the studio, you need that yin and yang. And so if I'm not out and about outside in the outdoors, then I can't be creative. And if I'm stuck inside painting and I can't think of an idea, then I need to go outside. And so they both work in this harmonious way that they can't live without each other.
I love that the kind of complementary nature where one is not taking away from the other, it's helping the other side, right? The creative and lived experience and like the action of surfing. I'm curious, like while you're surfing, is there any parallel like to surfing and creating, like flow state or anything that you feel as like a direct overlap between the two actions of surfing and creating?
Yeah, they're both incredibly creative. There's no rules, right? It's an individual sport, and so you have one pulse, a wave that comes thousands of miles away, and the very end of its energy is this wave, and so you have this really finite time to get as weird as you possibly can on it. And the amount of creativity that you can do on any board sport, that's skateboarding, snowboarding, surfing, it's all infinite ideas. And so that open box is something that is so cool and so creative. And so to me, they're painting any sort of surfing and board sport, all of them are equally creative.
Along the way, like when did you come across like the crypto space, NFT lands? When and how did you come across it? And when did you start first tokenizing work and really diving into the space?
That's a great question. When I was living in SF, me and a few friends had a studio that we shared, and two of my friends were deeply into Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I really had no idea what they were talking about. And I ultimately disregarded it, which I still kind of regret in a lot of ways. But flash forward a couple years later, I'm chatting with my buddy, and they were talking about NFTs and creating a project, and I still had no idea what they were talking about, and I disregarded it. And he was like, "Hey, you should probably check this out." And again, I kind of in one ear and out the other. And about a year and a half ago, I was in Mexico City, and me and a bunch of friends will kind of go on these different locations just to spark a bunch of creative ideas for a week. And this time it was in Mexico City. And so I'm out there, and my buddy Kyle is like, "Hey, this is happening right now. I think you should actually listen." I'm like, "Okay, dude, I don't know what you're talking about." He's like, "Tomorrow, let's meet up. I'm going to just explain everything, and then you can take it from there." And so we met up the next day, and we spent hours really deep diving into this idea and what this medium is. And it ultimately exploded my head when he saw that aha moment. He's like, "Okay, I have a bunch of Twitter handles you can follow. I have some resources that you can start to learn on." And he's like, "Don't make a project, just learn for the next 6 months and really join the community and really partake in what's happening. And if you can give back, give back. But right now, just be a sponge." And so for the next 6 months, that's what I did. During that process, some different ideas were popping up. That's when PFPs were super big and like blowing up, and everybody's making all these DAOs and whatnot. But, I was starting to dabble, like, "Hey, should I make this, PFP?" And then I was like, "I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm going to not do that quite yet." And it had like the end of the year happened, and it was the new year, and I came up with this idea for my kind of Genesis project, and I was laser focused. And I was like, "Okay, this is happening." And during the next 4 months, I ended up creating this whole concept that was based around snowboarding. And I wanted it to be, true experiences, true events, and kind of tie into a lot of my photography. And it ultimately was this snowboard trip based around friends, and it was 24 images representing a roll of film. And again, like, I learned so much on that. And once that bug hit, I was completely sold. I'd learned how to create a smart contract. I built the whole website, landing page, like this whole way to market it and really start to finish this huge project. And yeah, once I did all that, it really paused a lot of my other business, which was, a lot of retail and e-commerce and commissions. But I was so enamored by this technology and how all of it can loop back into my e-commerce down the line that I just put everything on hold. And here we are today. It hasn't gone away. It's certainly a medium that I will be using forever. I don't see any other way.
Totally. And along the way, tell me about how you met Brian Brinkman. He curated a release on Nifty Gateway under his publisher handle and featured you. And it was an awesome drop. It was really cool. It was such a cool collection and really put you on my radar in a big way. Big shout out to Brian Brinkman, constantly surfacing amazing artists. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, major shout out to Brian. I like such a legend and so humble, and he's just constantly highlighting and giving opposed to receiving. So huge shout out to Brian. Right when I jumped back into Web3, I had a Twitter handle, way back in the day that I never used, and I had a couple hundred followers, whatever. Again, I never used it, and as my friend gave me about 20 handles to follow, and I followed all those. And I don't know if somehow he was looking at my list, and he was like, "Yo, Brinkman's following you." And I was like, "Who's Brinkman? What are you talking about?" And I was following him already, which is like kind of ironic, just how the internet does whatever the internet does. And we've been following each other for a long time, like years before we even knew each other. When I launched my first project, I made this kind of commitment that I was going to move out of Oregon and go out to New York to meet as many artists as possible, learn some of these ropes, and then that also like overlap NFT NYC. I knew that I needed to be out there weeks before so I could have these one-on-one conversations and not have just party surface level questions. And when I flew out here, I hit him up, weeks before saying, "Hey, I'm out here. This is weird. We somehow follow each other, but I know you're out here. It'd be fun to meet up." Go and behold, we met up. I went to one of his comedy shows where he kind of like live animates while the comedians are talking. And, we've been friends ever since. And the Nifty Gateway project came up way down the line. I mean, this is probably almost a year later. Well, not actually about a half a year later. But I saw him do a couple of drops, and I was like, I messaged him asking, "Hey, what's the process? How are you choosing different artists?" And I ended up putting together a little pitch deck similar to what I did with you on the curated drop. We went through about 3 different concepts, and one of them hit, and we ended up doing this really, really fun and overwhelming drop. I mean, I still don't know how I'll ever witness such a crazy response from the community from that drop. It was very memorable.
It really was. It was so fun to see. And it's a perfect place to dig into what you've been cooking up with Summertime, the new collection that you're going to release on Nifty Gateway this Thursday. So yeah, would love to hear about the concept and then about the mechanics, how you structured and designed it. I'm pretty excited for it to be released. I know you are too. We've had it previewable on the site for a minute. People have been setting drop alerts, but yeah, tell the folks what they can expect.
Oh man, I'm so hyped on this one. I mean, Nifty Gateway is such an amazing onboarding platform for Web 2 and Web 3, and half of my audience is still traditional, and so it's this really beautiful kind of hybrid model that I really value. And the first collection was based around surfing, and the next one, most of my work is based around the outdoors and me being enamored and obsessed with people and their everyday lives, along with bridging all my real life on location experiences. And when we were talking about dates, we were talking about summer and kind of these different windows that were open. And I have all these notebooks that are out camping. And when I was putting together a pitch for you guys, I went through 3 different scenarios, and one of them was this camping model, which is Summertime. But it's really cool because when I go through all these projects, I look back at my library of books, and I get so inspired. And yeah, so I pulled most of these watercolors, then brought them on the computer and built out this whole collection that we see today. It's like when I look at it, I get this nostalgic play of the past and childhood and getting all friends together and us going swimming and camping. And then you look at it and you're like, okay, well, this is right before Memorial Day weekend. Now I'm like, what do I have planned for the weekend? I better figure out how I can go do this, past, present, and future, all into one collection. And ultimately, it's, we're all on the computer all day, and when I'm on the computer, all I'm thinking about is being outside and enjoying nature. And so I bridge all those together because it's my way of being outside when I'm stuck inside. And so this launch is pretty powerful for me, just to want to be present with all my friends and to have fun and get outside.
The structure of it, I think, is really rad too. We have it open and accessible. There's 4 different works included in the collection. They're all, by their exterior appearance, open editions, but there's a little tweak that we made to 2 of the pieces that we're not saying which pieces, but we've turned them into like what we're calling blind editions, where these 2 pieces have a a pretty low maximum number of editions that can be sold before they actually turn off. So while two of the works will be open for 24 hours and anyone who wants to collect an edition can collect an edition, two of them will turn off once they hit their hidden or blind maximum edition counts of purchases. So excited to see that. And now you're baking in a pretty special opportunity for your existing collectors on Nifty Gateway to have 5 minutes before the drop goes live to go in and collect the works that they want, which in theory gives them the first crack at collecting those two blind editions in addition to the truly open editions. So I thought that was a really cool wrinkle to put on top of this. A little bit of fun, you know, when you meet up with your friends and family, like for the holidays over summer, people are going off, they're playing tag and things like that, seeing who can catch someone else. And this is maybe the equivalent of digital tag with a release of digital art. I don't know. It's really fun. I'm very, very curious to see how all the collectors take it.
Oh man, me too. Oh, and don't forget, if you collect all four, then I will be offering an airdrop and a physical, an optional physical if you want it. But it'll be watercolors of the ideation phase. And I did that on my last drop, and the top 5 bidders got that, and that they were so happy, and like the amount of conversations and photos and that whole kind of personal touch has been really, really great. And so that's another kind of addition to all these, to the open and blind edition mechanic.
Yeah, I'm really, really, really excited for all of that. Well, this has been a really, really awesome chat. I just want to check with you real quick before we drop off. Is there any last thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
I mean, thank you everybody for, if you're listening, if you've been following me, maybe you're about to be following me, all of it, I feel that support. It's been really humble experience, jumping to Web3 and starting back to zero, right? It's like IG doesn't translate over to Web3. And so it's been really nice and a lot of hard work, and it feels good to get that response from y'all. So I really appreciate you. Other plugs, I mean, I would say, go to at alimofun.com. So that's ALIMOFUN. And that's where you can find all of my e-commerce and merchandise. And there's an NFT catalog on there and all sorts of things. And there's also a token gate on there as well. So any NFT holders can go onto the website and, connect their wallet and unlock different discounts. So yeah.
So much going on with the collection. Can't wait for Thursday. And again, like it's all previewable on niftygateway.com today. So I'm going to try to get this podcast out tonight, latest by Wednesday morning. So if you're listening to this as soon as it drops, make sure you go to niftygateway.com, look for summertime collection on the homepage, set that drop alert so you get that extra email reminder 30 minutes before the drop goes live at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Nifty Gateway. And then if you're a collector already of Alimo's work on Nifty Gateway, make sure you make that 5-minute window that opens up at 6:25 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. Thank you, man, for taking the time and chatting and creating the beautiful art that you create, man.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been really fun getting to know you and the whole Nifty Gateway family. And yeah, it's so cool. And I love what you guys are building and helping out all of us artists who need you guys to help us get our work out there. So thank you.
Ooh, perfect place to end.